My name is Cooper, and for the last 7 years, I thought I had everything I'd ever wanted. I married Anna when I was 29 and she was 24. I'd already established a solid career as a financial advisor, and she was just beginning to make a name for herself as a graphic designer. Together, we built a life that seemed almost too good to be true. Our marriage wasn't without its ups and downs, of course. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and we weren't immune to stress, arguments, or the occasional miscommunication. But through it all, I believed we were a team, a partnership grounded in mutual respect and love. One of the dreams we'd shared from the beginning was starting a family. When we first got married, Anna and I talked about it often, laughing as we imagined what our future kids might look like or what kind of parents we'd be. But as the years went by, those conversations became less frequent. At first, Anna said she wanted to wait until her career was more established, and I understood that. She was talented and ambitious, and I admired her drive. So, we waited. Then, when her career took off, it was about saving enough money for a down payment on a bigger house. Again, I agreed, it made sense to be financially secure before bringing kids into the picture. But once we bought the house, her reasons for waiting began to shift. It wasn't just about practicalities anymore, it was about timing. "Let's wait until we've traveled more," she said once. Another time, it was, "I want to take on a few more big projects before we start thinking about kids." Her enthusiasm for the idea of parenthood seemed to fade with each passing year. I didn't press the issue too much at first. I loved Anna, and I wanted her to feel ready. I told myself that it was better to wait and have kids when we were both on the same page than to push her into something she wasn't prepared for. But as I approached my mid-30s, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that time was slipping away. Every time we talked about it, her answers felt more like excuses, her tone more evasive. Looking back, I see now that the cracks in our relationship had started forming long before I realized it. Anna and I had always been good at painting a picture of happiness for the outside world, but beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. It wasn't just the delays that bothered me, it was the growing distance between us. Anna had always been my best friend, the person I turned to for everything. But lately, it felt like she was pulling away, and I couldn't figure out why. At the time, I told myself it was just a phase. Every couple goes through rough patches, I thought. This was no different. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And as I would soon learn, that feeling wasn't just in my head. Anna's reluctance to start a family became more apparent as time went on. Whenever I brought up the subject, she found a way to deflect or change the topic entirely. One evening, as we sat on the couch scrolling through a real estate website, an activity we often did for fun, I casually mentioned how our spare bedroom would make a perfect nursery. She smiled faintly but didn't look up from her tablet. "It's a great space," she said, "but I was actually thinking we could turn it into a home gym." "A gym?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. "Yeah," she said, her voice brightening. "I've been wanting to get back into yoga and maybe try some Pilates. It could be a great way for us to unwind after work." I nodded, trying not to read too much into her suggestion. But later that night, as I lay in bed, her response gnawed at me. It wasn't just about the room, it was the way she dismissed the idea of a nursery without a second thought, as if the possibility of children wasn't even on her radar. Over the following weeks, other signs began to emerge. Anna, who had always been meticulous about her schedule, started coming home later than usual. When I asked, she'd shrug it off, saying she got caught up at work or went out for drinks with colleagues. I didn't think much of it at first. She had a demanding job, and networking was a big part of her industry. But then there were the phone calls. She'd always been open about her phone, leaving it on the kitchen counter or coffee table without a second thought. But lately, she'd started keeping it with her at all times. I'd walk into a room, and she'd quickly tuck it into her pocket or flip it face down on the table. One Saturday morning, as we ate breakfast, her phone buzzed on the counter. She reached for it quickly, almost knocking over her coffee in the process. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she said, glancing at the screen before putting the phone face down again. "Just work stuff." I didn't press her on it, but a sense of unease settled in my chest. Then there were the trips. Anna, who had never shown much interest in travel beyond the occasional weekend getaway, suddenly started talking about how she wanted to explore new places. "There's a design conference in Chicago next month," she said one evening as we cleared the dinner table. "I think it would be a great networking opportunity." "That sounds fun," I said. "Do you want me to come along? We could turn it into a mini vacation." She hesitated, her smile faltering for a moment. "Oh, it's just a quick trip," she said, brushing off the idea. "You'd probably be bored." Her tone was light, but the excuse felt flimsy. I couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't want me there. By now, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The shifting timelines for starting a family, the late nights, the secretive behavior, it all pointed to something deeper than a simple change of priorities. For the first time in our marriage, I started questioning whether Anna was being completely honest with me. I wanted to believe that there was a reasonable explanation for her actions. After all, we'd built a life together, and I couldn't imagine her hiding something from me. But a small voice in the back of my mind told me otherwise. And I couldn't silence it. As the weeks went on, my suspicions grew. Anna's behavior had shifted in ways that were subtle yet undeniable. She still smiled, laughed, and carried on as if everything was normal, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. I began paying closer attention, searching for patterns in her actions. It wasn't just the late nights or her sudden interest in solo trips, it was the way she spoke, how her tone shifted when I brought up topics like family or our future together. One evening, as I was going through the mail, I found a receipt tucked into one of the envelopes. It was for a high-end wine bar downtown, a place Anna and I had never visited together. The date on the receipt matched one of the nights she'd claimed to be working late. I felt a wave of unease but told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it had been a work meeting or a casual drink with colleagues. But when I casually asked her about that night during dinner, her response only deepened my doubts. "Oh, that night," she said, her fork pausing midair. "Yeah, I was stuck at the office really late. I barely had time to grab something quick on the way home." Her explanation didn't match the receipt, and the way she avoided eye contact didn't escape me. "Did you go out with anyone?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "No, it was just a long day," she replied quickly, then changed the subject. The unease that had been gnawing at me began to crystallize into something more concrete. Anna wasn't just delaying our plans to start a family, she was hiding something. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in the living room with Max, our Labrador, curled up at my feet. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of everything. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? I decided to take a closer look at her phone the next time I had the chance. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I needed were hidden there. The opportunity came a few nights later. Anna had fallen asleep on the couch while we were watching a movie, her phone resting on the armrest beside her. I picked it up carefully, my heart pounding as I unlocked the screen. At first, everything seemed normal, texts from friends, emails about work, notifications from social media apps. But as I scrolled further, I found a conversation that stopped me cold. It was with someone named Jay. The messages were casual at first, talk about music, restaurants, and local events, but as I read on, the tone shifted. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Me too. You're the best part of my day. My stomach churned as I read the words. There was no mistaking the intimacy in their exchange. I put the phone back where I'd found it and sat in the dark, my mind racing. The woman I had trusted with my life, the one I had envisioned a future with, was keeping something from me, something that had the power to destroy everything we'd built together. For the first time, I questioned whether I truly knew her at all. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. The messages from Jay played on a loop in my mind, each word chipping away at the trust one had in Anna. I wanted to confront her immediately, demand answers, and force her to admit to whatever was going on. But something held me back. I needed more proof. That day at work, I found it nearly impossible to concentrate. The numbers on my spreadsheets blurred together, my focus broken by a constant replay of the previous night. I knew that looking at her phone had crossed a line, but her messages with Jay weren't something I could ignore. When I got home, Anna was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She greeted me with a smile, and for a brief moment, I felt like I was looking at the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But then I remembered the texts. "Hey," I said, leaning against the counter. "Do you want to do something this weekend? Maybe go for a hike or check out that new brunch place downtown?" She looked up, her smile faltering just slightly. "Oh, I'd love to, but I already made plans with some friends from work. We're doing a spa day." Another excuse. Another wall between us. That night, I decided to take my search further. I hated the idea of spying on her, but I couldn't live with the uncertainty. While she was in the shower, I opened her laptop. She always used the same password, so it wasn't hard to access her email. What I found there confirmed everything I feared. There were dozens of messages between her and Jay. Some were about work, but others were far more personal. They talked about their favorite restaurants, shared inside jokes, and made plans to meet at places I didn't recognize. The email that broke me, though, was titled "Last Night." "I can't stop thinking about you. Being with you feels so natural, like it's where I'm supposed to be." Her response was just as damning, "I feel the same way. Thank you for being so patient with me. It means everything." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening as the weight of her betrayal sank in. This wasn't just a flirtation or a misunderstanding. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. When Anna came into the bedroom later that night, she kissed me goodnight as if nothing had happened. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she'd been living this double life. The plans to delay starting a family, the trips, the late nights, all of it had been part of a carefully constructed facade. And I was left to wonder if anything about our life together had ever been real. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself much longer. The evidence was undeniable, and my anger was growing too large to contain. But I also knew that once I confronted her, there would be no turning back. The life we had built, the dreams we'd shared, it was all about to come crashing down. The weight of what I'd discovered became unbearable. Each moment I spent with Anna felt like a lie, her every word and smile tainted by the knowledge of what she was hiding. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It was a Friday evening when I finally decided to confront her. She had come home late again, claiming she'd been out for drinks with her coworkers. As she breezed through the door, her cheerful demeanor only fueled my anger. "Hey," she said, placing her bag on the counter. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare." I stood in the doorway to the living room, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "Sure," she said cautiously, setting down her keys. "What's up? Who's Jay?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. For a moment, she froze, her eyes widening ever so slightly. It was a small reaction, but it told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, forcing a laugh. Is this about work? Because. Don't, I interrupted. Don't lie to me, Anna. I saw the messages. I know about the emails, the meetups, everything. Her face paled, and she took a step back, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. You went through my stuff. Don't turn this on me, I snapped. You've been lying to me for months. I deserve the truth. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, she looked down at the floor. It's not what you think, she said quietly. Then explain it to me, I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been having an affair. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice trembling. It started as a friendship. Someone I could talk to when I felt overwhelmed. But then what? I pressed, my anger boiling over. You decided to throw away everything we've built. Our marriage. Our future. I didn't throw anything away, she shot back, her voice breaking. I needed something you weren't giving me. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What I wasn't giving you? I repeated. You could have talked to me, Anna. You could have told me you were unhappy. Instead, you turned to someone else. I was scared, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. Scared that if I told you how I felt, it would make things worse. And Jay, he listened. He understood me in a way I didn't think you could. I stared at her, my chest heaving with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Do you even realize what you've done? The lies, the deceit, you've destroyed everything. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you did, I said coldly. And now, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. The room fell silent, the weight of her betrayal hanging between us like a storm cloud. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I'll end it. I'll cut all ties with him. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Her words felt hollow, but a part of me wanted to believe her. A part of me wanted to hold on to the life we'd built, even if it was built on a foundation of lies. But deep down, I knew that things would never be the same. Not after this. After our confrontation, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Anna tried to go about her days as if things could somehow return to normal, but the tension between us was palpable. Every conversation felt forced, every glance loaded with unspoken words. True to her promise, she said she'd cut ties with Jay. I didn't see her phone light up with his messages anymore, and she no longer mentioned her late nights or work trips. On the surface, it looked like she was making an effort to mend what had been broken. But I wasn't sure I could believe her. Trust, I realized, is fragile. It takes years to build and moments to shatter. Even as I watched Anna go through the motions of repair, the damage she'd done lingered in the corners of my mind. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past weeks in my head. The texts, the emails, the look on her face when I confronted her, it all swirled together in an endless loop. I kept asking myself the same questions. Why hadn't she come to me? Was I truly the problem, or was she just searching for something I could never provide? Max became my only source of solace during those sleepless nights. He'd jump onto the bed and rest his head on my chest, his quiet presence a reminder that not everything in my life was broken. One evening, Anna suggested we see a therapist. We need help, Cooper, she said, her voice tinged with desperation. I can't fix this on my own, and I don't want to lose you. Reluctantly, I agreed. The sessions were grueling. The therapist probed into every crevice of our relationship, uncovering truths I wasn't ready to hear. Anna spoke about feeling trapped, about how the pressure to start a family had weighed on her. "It's not that I don't want kids," she said during one session, tears streaming down her face. I felt like I was losing myself. And instead of talking to you about it, I made the worst mistake of my life." Her confession stung, but it also brought clarity. I began to see how I might have contributed to the cracks in our marriage, not by cheating or lying, but by failing to notice the distance growing between us. For a brief time, the therapy sessions gave me hope. Anna seemed genuinely remorseful, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what we'd lost. But that hope was fragile. Every time I saw her glance at her phone or heard her laugh at a joke I didn't understand, the doubts crept back in. Was she really committed to us, or was she just biding her time? The uncertainty ate away at me, leaving me torn between the life we'd built and the betrayal that had brought us to this point. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not yet. The therapy sessions seemed to mark a turning point, however slight. Anna was attentive in ways she hadn't been in years. She started leaving her phone out in the open again, as if to prove she had nothing to hide. She offered small gestures of affection, a kiss on the cheek as I left for work, a hand on my shoulder during dinner, and though they felt strained at first, I wanted to believe they were genuine. We began talking more, not just in therapy but at home. One evening, as we sat in the living room with Max between us, Anna turned to me, her expression earnest. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know it'll take time for you to trust me again. But I want to try, Cooper. I want us to be okay." Her words stirred something in me, a fragile hope that maybe we could find a way back to each other. For the first time in months, we started making plans together. We talked about small trips we could take, like a weekend in the mountains or a visit to her parents' lake house. The discussions were cautious, almost hesitant, but they felt like a step in the right direction. At therapy, Anna spoke openly about her reasons for delaying our family plans. "I was scared," she admitted. "Of losing my independence, of not being enough for our kids, or for you. And instead of facing those fears, I ran." Hearing her say those words was both painful and validating. For years, I'd thought her reluctance was about timing or logistics, but it was deeper than that. "I want to change," she continued. "I want to prove to you that I'm committed to our future, whatever that looks like." Her vulnerability softened the edges of my anger. I found myself thinking about the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who had once been my best friend, my partner in every sense of the word. For a brief moment, it felt like we were moving forward. But rebuilding a marriage is like walking on glass. One wrong step, and everything shatters. Despite Anna's efforts, there were still moments that fed my doubts. A glance she held too long with a stranger, a work meeting that ran late, a vague answer to a simple question, all of it kept me on edge. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that she had changed. But trust, once broken, is hard to repair. As I lay in bed one night, listening to her breathing beside me, I found myself wondering if this fragile hope was enough. Could we really move past what had happened? Or were we just delaying the inevitable? Only time would tell, but deep down, I couldn't shake the fear that our foundation, no matter how much we tried to rebuild it, was still cracked beyond repair. Just as I started to let my guard down, the cracks in our fragile reconciliation began to show. Anna had made promises, and for a while, it seemed like she was following through. But trust is a delicate thing, and in the back of my mind, doubts lingered. It was a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening when everything unraveled again. Anna had told me she was working late on a project with her team, something she'd mentioned in therapy as part of her renewed focus on career balance. I wanted to believe her, but the old, gnawing suspicion crept back in. Out of habit, I checked the tracking app I'd installed on her phone months earlier. It was something I hadn't done since our therapy sessions began, as part of my attempt to rebuild trust. The app showed her location, but she wasn't at her office. She was downtown, near the same boutique wine bar I'd found a receipt for weeks earlier. My chest tightened as I stared at the blinking dot on the screen. I didn't want to believe it, but my gut told me otherwise. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and drove there, my mind racing with a mix of anger and dread. When I arrived, I parked a block away and walked toward the bar. Through the large glass windows, I saw her immediately. She was seated at a corner table, leaning in close to someone. It was Jay. The sight hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just talking, they were laughing, sharing a bottle of wine, their body language intimate in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. I stood there, frozen, watching as Anna reached across the table to touch his hand. This wasn't a work meeting. This wasn't a mistake. I turned and walked back to my car, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I went home and waited, my anger simmering into something colder, more calculated. When she came home later, she acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek and apologized for working late, her voice cheerful, her smile bright. I said nothing. The next day, I began laying the groundwork for what I knew had to happen. Anna had broken my trust once, and I had foolishly given her a second chance. But this time, I wouldn't be blindsided. This time, I would be the one in control. I contacted a divorce lawyer that afternoon, outlining everything I discovered and gathering the evidence I needed to protect myself. Emails, texts, receipts, I compiled it all, each piece of proof a reminder of the person Anna had become. By the end of the week, the papers were ready. When I handed them to her, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply stared at them, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to stop. "Neither did I said coldly, turning to leave. As I walked out of the room, I felt an odd mix of relief and sadness. Our marriage was over, not with a bang but with the quiet, devastating realization that there was nothing left to save. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The days after serving Anna the divorce papers were a blur. I had prepared myself for her reaction, but the reality of ending our marriage was heavier than I expected. Anna moved out within a week, taking only what she needed and leaving behind a house that felt unnaturally quiet. Her once vibrant presence was replaced by an emptiness that echoed in every corner. Friends and family began to learn the truth. Some reached out to offer support, while others avoided the topic altogether, their unease palpable. A few mutual friends tried to remain neutral, but the weight of the situation made it difficult. "Are you okay?" a close friend, Josh, asked one evening over drinks. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel relieved one minute and completely hollow the next." "You've been through hell, Coop," he said. "It's okay to feel both." Meanwhile, Anna's world seemed to unravel quickly. News of her affair spread through our social circle, and the image she had carefully maintained began to crack. Colleagues who once admired her distanced themselves, and friends who had been loyal to us both quietly sided with me. One mutual friend confided that Anna's lover, Jay, had already pulled back. "I don't think he wants to deal with the mess," she said. "It's like he's leaving her to deal with the fallout alone." Hearing that didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, it made me feel a deeper sadness for the woman I had once loved, now standing in the ruins of her choices. At work, I threw myself into my projects, finding solace in routine and numbers. Max became my constant companion, his quiet loyalty a balm for the raw wound Anna had left behind. Despite my efforts to move forward, the memories lingered. I'd walk into the living room and remember how we used to sit together on the couch, laughing at some ridiculous show. I'd see the empty chair at the dining table and feel the weight of her absence. But there was also anger at her betrayal, at the lies she'd told, and at myself for ignoring the warning signs. In therapy, my counselor encouraged me to focus on healing rather than dwelling on the past. Closure doesn't come from the other person, she said. It comes from within. Her words stayed with me, even as I struggled to let go of the bitterness. One day, while cleaning out the closet, I found an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I saw pictures of happier times, vacations, holidays, random snapshots of our life together. For the first time, I allowed myself to grieve, not for what Anna had done, but for what we had lost. It was a painful process, but I knew it was necessary. To truly move forward, I had to let go of the anger and accept the reality of what had happened. And while the scars would remain, I began to feel a faint glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future waiting for me beyond the pain. As the weeks turned into months, the initial sting of Anna's betrayal began to dull, though the scars remained. I tried to rebuild my life in small ways, focusing on work, spending more time with friends, and reconnecting with hobbies I'd long neglected. But even as I moved forward, there was an undeniable void. Anna, too, seemed to struggle in the aftermath. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that she had left her job shortly after moving out, citing personal reasons. Her relationship with Jay had fizzled out quickly, leaving her isolated and adrift. "She's not doing well," one friend confided during a chance meeting. "I think she's regretting everything, but she doesn't know how to fix it." Hearing about her pain didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd once craved. Instead, it stirred a complicated mix of emotions, pity, anger, and a lingering sadness for the life we'd lost. One evening, I received an unexpected text from Anna. "Cooper, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to apologize. I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to know that I never stopped caring about you. I hope one day you can forgive me, even if it's just for your own peace." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of the pain she'd caused. But another part of me, the part that had been working to let go, knew that doing so wouldn't bring me any closer to closure. In the end, I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on myself. I started running regularly, finding solace in the rhythm of my footsteps and the crisp morning air. Max became my loyal running partner, his wagging tail a constant reminder that not everything in my life was broken. I also took up photography, a hobby I'd always been curious about but never pursued. It gave me a creative outlet and a way to see the world through a new lens, literally and figuratively. But even as I rebuilt my life, there were moments when the weight of the past caught up with me. I'd find an old note from Anna tucked into a drawer or stumble across one of her favorite recipes in our kitchen. Those moments were bittersweet, a reminder of the love we'd once shared and the choices that had torn us apart. Through it all, I kept going, one step at a time. And while I couldn't erase the pain of what had happened, I began to realize that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning to live with the scars and finding strength in the lessons they taught me. Anna's chapter in my life wasn't over entirely, but it was no longer the focal point. She was a part of my story, yes, but not the end of it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to start writing the next chapter on my own terms. As the dust of the divorce settled, I found myself stepping into a world that felt both unfamiliar and freeing. For the first time in years, my decisions were solely mine to make. There was no one else to consult, no compromises to reach. It was strange, but it also carried a sense of possibility. I started small. My weekends, once spent navigating Anna's social calendar or accompanying her to events, became mine to fill. I rediscovered my love for cooking, experimenting with recipes and sharing the results with friends. Max remained my constant companion through it all. His boundless energy pushed me to get outside, and his quiet presence reminded me that love, even the unconditional kind, could still exist. Work became a place of focus and purpose. My clients relied on me to help them manage their finances, and that sense of responsibility grounded me. My boss noticed my renewed dedication and hinted at a potential promotion, a sign that my efforts were paying off. But it wasn't all about productivity. I began to reconnect with parts of myself I'd forgotten. I joined a local photography club, where I met people who shared my interest in capturing life's moments. The creative outlet gave me a new perspective, and I found myself drawn to scenes that spoke of resilience, wildflowers growing through cracks in the pavement, the steady flow of rivers carving through stone. Socially, I began to branch out. Friends who had kept their distance during the divorce started reaching out again, inviting me to dinners, game nights, and even weekend trips. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild a sense of community. But the process wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when I'd see couples walking hand in hand or families at the park and feel the ache of what I'd lost. I still thought about Anna sometimes, though less frequently than before. Her apology lingered in my mind, not as a wound but as a reminder of the lessons I'd learned. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about excusing her actions or reconciling, it was about releasing myself from the grip of anger and pain. In one quiet moment of reflection, I wrote in my journal. The past is a place to visit, not a place to live. I've spent too much time there. Those words became a mantra of sorts, guiding me as I navigated the delicate balance between remembering and moving forward. As I stood on the brink of a new chapter, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future would hold or if I'd ever fully trust someone again. But I did know one thing, I was still here, still standing, still capable of building a life worth living. And that was enough. The final chapter of my journey wasn't marked by any grand epiphany or dramatic event. Instead, it was a quiet realization that life, even after being shattered, has a way of piecing itself back together. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I woke up one morning to find that the pain of Anna's betrayal no longer defined me. It was there, a scar rather than a wound, but it no longer consumed my thoughts. In its place was something else, a sense of peace. I had spent so long searching for answers, why she did what she did, whether I could have done anything differently, that I hadn't realized the answers didn't matter anymore. The past was unchangeable, but the future was still mine to shape. Max and I found a rhythm to our days. We started each morning with a long walk, the crisp air filling my lungs as he trotted happily beside me. In those quiet moments, I found a sense of grounding that I hadn't felt in years. Work continued to thrive, and the promotion I'd been hinting at eventually came through. It wasn't just about the title or the pay raise, it was about the confidence it gave me to believe in myself again. Socially, I was beginning to flourish, too. I made new friends through my photography club, and my old friendships deepened as I leaned on those who had supported me through the hardest moments. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about Anna. A mutual friend mentioned that she was trying to rebuild her career and mend the relationships she'd strained. I wished her no ill will, but I also felt no urge to reconnect. That part of my life was over, and I was content to leave it behind. One evening, as I sorted through my photography prints, I came across an image I'd taken shortly after the divorce. It was of a single flower growing through a crack in the pavement, its petals vibrant against the gray concrete. It struck me as the perfect metaphor for my journey. Life had tried to crush me, but I had found a way to grow through the cracks. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Perhaps one day I'd meet someone new, someone who valued honesty and shared my dreams. But for now, I was okay with being alone. I had learned to enjoy my own company, to find joy in the small, quiet moments. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. As I sat there, Max resting his head on my lap, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for what had happened, but for what it had taught me. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, they had all been part of the journey. But they didn't define me. What defined me was my ability to endure, to rebuild, and to find hope in the unlikeliest of places. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned, but that was okay. It was still my life, and it was worth living. And for the first time in years, I truly believed that.